So, for folks who don't know who I am, my name is Mike Maharrey, and I'm the National Communications Director for the 10th Amendment Center. And I've been working with the 10th Amendment Center for 11 years or something ridiculous like that. And the 10th Amendment Center, again, for folks who might not be real familiar with our work, we kind of work in two streams of activity. We do education, which is primarily revolves around constitutional originalism and just trying to teach people what that Constitution actually says, what it actually was supposed to mean, what the system of government we're supposed to have is supposed to look like. I keep saying supposed to because what we have resembles nothing like what the constitutional system was intended to be. So I think it's important for people to understand that. And then we also do activism. Our work focuses mostly at the state level. We do what we commonly refer to as nullification. It's basically just saying no. So it's working with state legislatures to try to find ways to refuse to cooperate with the federal government as a way to undermine overreaching federal power, as a way to decentralize power down to the state and ultimately the local level. And really the core of my political philosophy is, at least from a pragmatic standpoint, is decentralization. I think centralization of power is the biggest threat to liberty. So I don't get real excited when the Supreme Court hands some crumb of liberty. I know libertarians get really excited about this stuff, but I think really what you're doing with that is you're just centralizing power more. And I think we're better off working at the state and local level. And so that's really the focus of what we're doing with the 10th Amendment Center, using state and local power to undermine the feds and to kind of work toward decentralizing the system. What I'm going to talk about tonight is even more local than what we typically do at the 10th Amendment Center. And really over the last 4 or 5 years, we have started to look at a lot more local activism. So we're talking county and city type of activity. And interestingly, this type of work, what you do in the city of Los Angeles or in the county or in whatever town you happen to be in, it can actually have a significant impact on federal power. It's kind of a bottom-up approach. And really the core of what we do activism-wise is the fact that the federal government, it requires state and local cooperation to do just about everything. So to enforce a federal law, it requires state and local law enforcement. To implement a federal program, it takes state and local officials doing the bidding of the feds. When the state and local governments say, you know what, we're not going to help with this, the federal government finds it very difficult to get things done. And probably the best example of this, because it's been going on the longest, is the state level legalization of marijuana, which of course was started in California in 1996 with the legalization of medical marijuana. And then over the years, despite aggressive federal efforts to stop it, we've now grown to where we have 36 states that have legalized medical marijuana. We have 15 states that have legalized marijuana completely. This last election cycle, we saw, Mississippi legalize medical marijuana. I mean, who'd have ever thought Mississippi would legalize any kind of marijuana? And this is despite, again, aggressive federal pushback, aggressive federal efforts in the early days to try to stop states from doing this, despite a Supreme Court decision saying that the federal government can do this. The fact that the states simply quit enforcing these marijuana laws have made it very difficult for the feds to maintain prohibition. And we're seeing it erode away more and more day after day. So when you stop something even at the local level, it actually has an impact up the chain. And, when you have a victory at the local level, oftentimes that'll spur more activism at the state level. And then, eventually the feds will catch on and you'll have wholesale change. So it's very much a bottom-up approach. And one of the reasons that I really like local activism is because it is much more prone to be successful. And it's very good medicine for what I call the doomsday libertarian. And we have a lot of doomsday libertarians out there that are basically, they're to the point that we're just going to let it all burn. And I think a lot of that stems from the fact that there has not been a lot of electoral success for the LP, for liberty in general. And so we look at these this lack of electoral success and figure, well, we can't do anything. And so it creates this kind of attitude of pessimism that I've seen kind of move through the liberty movement, not just the LP, the broader movement as well. And I like a quote by Murray Rothbard. He said, "For the libertarians, the main task of the present epoch is to cast off the needless and debilitating pessimism, to set his sights on long-run victory and set about the road to its attainment." So, it's about strategy. What can we do where we are to advance liberty, even if it's just a little teeny, sliver of liberty? Every inch we gain for liberty is an inch gained, and then creates a, kind of a beachhead where we can push ahead farther. When I first started working at the 10th Amendment Center, a lot of y'all probably know Michael Bolden. He's the founder, executive director of the TAC, also one of my best friends, a proud resident of Los Angeles. And when I first started working for the 10th Amendment, I honestly was still pretty much a neocon. I had no idea what I was getting into. I had this vague idea that, limited government is good, but I thought Republicans were limited government. I learned, it took me about 6 months to figure out that Republicans were just as bad on the Constitution and just as prone to big government as the Democrats. But Bolden used to say, and he'll still say this, when it comes to activism, never call the 202 area code, which of course is Washington, D.C. And I didn't get it when he used to. In fact, it kind of annoyed me when he'd say that, because if you're going to do activism, of course you have to do something in D.C., right? And what Bolden was getting at was that really all of this effort that we spend trying to influence DC politics is generally fruitless and probably not going to get the kind of results that we want. And I use this example. Now, I get this now. I use the example of calling your congressman. And if any of you all have ever called your congressman, you probably had the experience. You talk to an intern, and if they agree with you, they might kind of pat you on the head for calling, and they'll promise that that your call is a concern. And then they might send you an email in a couple of weeks. Thanks for contacting us. And it's just this generic thing. And when you get done, nobody's paid a damn bit of attention to anything that you said. And it's frustrating, and it's kind of discouraging. And you realize that unless you're a big moneyed lobbyist with deep pockets, which I'm guessing none of us are, you're probably not going to get real far in Washington, D.C. So why not focus our attention on some place that we can actually make a real difference? And that is, again, at the state level, and of course at the local level. It takes much less, it takes much fewer people to influence things at the local and state level than it does at the national level. I once talked to a state representative in Kentucky, and he told me that he often went through entire legislative sessions without ever getting a phone call from a constituent regarding a specific bill, because nobody's paying attention to state legislatures. So if he gets 10 phone calls on one specific piece of legislation, it gets his attention, because he's just not used to having anybody paying any attention to what he's doing. And I think this is even more true at the local level. I think 2 or 3 people who are really committed can make a huge difference at the local level on a specific issue, because you just have more influence, And so that's kind of what we're going to focus on. I'm actually going to get into some nuts and bolts stuff here in just a second. But one more kind of big picture thing I wanted to touch on is the fact that political activism in general, I think, is a long game. You very rarely get instantaneous victories. And I think that's difficult for people in in the 21st century. We like the instant gratification. We like the 30-second soundbite. So we want to go out and we want to do, 3 weeks of activism and have a big win, and we're all free and liberty prevails. And very rarely does that happen. Most of the time, especially on these big policy issues, you're talking about years. I mean, just look at the movement of marijuana. It started in 1996. We're now in 2021. So it took a long time, and it took many incremental steps. And oftentimes it took little bitty steps that a lot of people are like, gosh, is this even doing any good? And this is an area that I found that a lot of libertarians really struggle with, because we are people of principle, which is a good thing. We have very, very strong ideas about what the role of government should be, which I think for a lot of us is none, or, if anything, extremely small. So we look at something like going through the legislative process, and we get frustrated with it because oftentimes you're taking a very small step that seems like you're not really getting liberty. And we've actually had a lot of pushback from libertarians with some of the work at the 10th Amendment Center, because they think that specific bills don't go far enough. I'll give you a specific example. For a long time, we got a lot of opposition on marijuana bills, because people would say, well, this doesn't help people that have already been arrested. They already have these arrest records, and we have to do something in order to expunge their criminal records. Of course, I agree with that, but very rarely are you going to legalize medical marijuana, legalize recreational marijuana, get an expungement bill, and open the door for smoking in public all in a single bill. It just doesn't happen. So sometimes you have to take the slice of bread instead of the loaf of bread, and realize that you can take that slice of bread and build on that to get another slice of bread, and then if you do it long enough, then eventually you have the whole loaf of bread. And we've really seen this with the marijuana movement. It starts with medical in most cases. A lot of the medical programs suck at first. It'll be like for 2 conditions, and you can't smoke and you can't grow and blah blah blah. And then as time goes on, you see these restrictions will start to loosen, and you'll see the legislature come back and they'll add 4 new conditions. And then the next thing you know, they're saying, oh, well, we're going to allow people to grow an individual plant. So these things expand over time. So I get really frustrated when people oppose a bill that's a decent bill. It's not a great bill, but they oppose it because they want the whole slice of bread, and then ultimately end up with nothing. So I think it's really important, if you're going to get into actual activism, whether it be lobbying at the state legislature level or doing some of the more grassroots stuff that I'm going to talk about here in a minute, you have to realize that it's a long game, and you have to be willing to take incremental steps. And it's a strategic thing. It takes a lot of thought. You don't want to compromise your principles away on the one hand, and on the other hand, you don't want to demand an activism step that nobody's going to accept. So you really have to be very forward thinking and strategic, and what's the word I'm looking for? Very specific about what you're doing. Another Rothbard quote that I love, and I use this often with these folks that they'll say with marijuana, well, we don't want legalization. We want complete decriminalization. Well, that's not going to happen in most cases. It's not politically viable. I would love it too, but I mean, for God's sakes, tomatoes are legalized to some degree, right? So you're not going to get the state legislature just to get up one day and say, we're just going to let marijuana be. It's just not going to happen. Now, it may happen someday down the road, and we can certainly push towards that. But you have to, again, have the willingness to take the incremental steps. And Rothbard said, libertarians must come to realize that parroting ultimate principles is not enough coping with the real world. So we have to have strategy that will work. We have to have activism that can actually make gains, or just beating our heads against the wall. Now, there of course is the debate, and I think this applies more with electoral politics. The whole idea of winning votes or getting the message out, and that's a whole different ball of wax. But we're talking practical, strategic activism here. So ultimately, what we're wanting to do is we're wanting to take some step forward that is going to, in a practical way, mean a little bit more liberty and set the stage for a lot more liberty down the road. So we have to find that balance. It's the old foot in the door technique that you learn if you're in sales. It was the visual image. If you just get somebody to open the door and then you stick your foot in there so they can't close it. That's really kind of the first step marijuana legalization bill. That's a foot in the door, for medical. And then the next thing you're in Colorado and it's fully legalized. So just thinking big picture again. Think local, think incremental, think pragmatic, and then figure out a way to push forward with each step. So you're taking a step-by-step approach. So what I really want to get into now is some really just kind of nuts and bolts on local activism. And I'm talking about here primarily issue-oriented activism at the local level. So we're primarily talking about dealing with the city council, a county commission. I know in California, you've got a lot of different boards that you may want to work in. So what can we do as libertarians to expand the field for liberty in these very local ways? So I'm gonna go through some processes, and these are actually processes that I went through with my own political activism in Lexington, Kentucky, when I lived up there. And I'll tell you a little bit more about that in here in just a minute. But the first step, you might be thinking, okay, well, what do we do? What issue are we going to take up? Because God knows there's 650 bajillion things that governments are doing that are infringing on our liberty. How in the world do we pick the thing that we're going to do? And I would suggest the first thing is just what interests you. What policy area is significant to you, that you know a little bit about, that you're passionate about, that gets your energy up. You don't want to get into something that bores you, because this is going to take a lot of work. It's going to take a lot of effort, and it's going to be over the long haul. So you can't just have, 2 weeks of I'm excited about this and then get, this is boring. So it really needs to be something that animates you, something that you're interested in, something that that you're passionate about. One of the things for me personally was surveillance. Surveillance has kind of been my big issue with the 10th Amendment Center. I hate the fact that the government is spying on us all the time. And it's something that I've learned quite a bit about over the years with the work at the 10th Amendment Center. So it was a natural fit for me to take that and kind of take it down to the hyper local level. The next thing that you can kind of do is you've heard the stupid Homeland Security slogan, if you see something, say something. You can also kind of apply that to activism. If you see something, do something. You may just notice something that's going on in your community that is an egregious thing, and that could be the spark for doing activism. And for me, again, kind of going into my own personal little story, this happened when I was living in Lexington. And one day my wife and I were going for a walk. There's a park that was relatively close to our house. It had a skateboard pit in it where all the kids skateboarded, and had a nice little trail that walked around it. So we were out walking one day, and we noticed they were putting up a pole, like a telephone pole. We were like, oh, cool. They're going to put up lights for the kids so they can skateboard in the evening. And so we thought, well, that's nice. And then about 4 or 5 days later, we were walking in the same park, and we noticed that they had put security cameras on the pole. So we dubbed it the spy pole. And knowing a little bit about surveillance, that this was probably the tip of the iceberg, I got very, very curious. And again, this is in my neighborhood. So I was like, what in the hell are these people doing? So I started doing a little research. I started digging, and come to find out that this was a pilot program that the city council had passed. The long and short of it, the honest truth of it was they really wanted to put these cameras in a park on the north end of Lexington, which is a heavily minority part of town. But they knew they couldn't really get away with doing that first, so they put it where the white kids skateboard, so that they could kind of put their foot in the door and eventually put these cameras in other skateboard parks. So, you know, in and of itself, you know, I guess a camera in a park isn't that big a deal. And you can make the argument, oh, this is public property, so you have no expectation of privacy and yada, yada. We could have that debate. But I knew that this was just the tip of the iceberg. If you're seeing surveillance, there's surveillance that you're not seeing. So my curiosity being piqued, I started doing open records requests and trying to find out what other surveillance equipment that the Lexington Police Department actually had. And I came to find out that the city had what they called mobile surveillance cameras. And at the time I had no idea what that was, and they had no intention of telling me. And long story short, ended up in a lawsuit that went on for 3 years trying to get information about these mobile surveillance cameras. The funny part of the story is once I actually got my hands on some redacted documents, the police department wasn't very good at redacting. So you could actually take the documents and hold them up to light and read them. So I actually knew what they were, what the lawsuit was all about the whole time, but they didn't know that I knew. So, but anyway, so this was recognition that Lexington was doing covert surveillance. As it turns out, some of the cameras that they had some that they could disguise in street lights. They had some that they could disguise as like utility, like electric utility panels. It turns out they were putting these in various neighborhoods and using them for drug surveillance. Everything always goes to drugs, right? And so I knew that there was a surveillance program. So I got together with a friend of mine, Clay Davis, who also actually lived in my neighborhood. And we just started to put our head together and we're like, okay, we've got surveillance right here in Lexington, Kentucky. We know that they're trying to keep it secret. What is it? What can we do from a practical standpoint? How can we take a step towards addressing this issue? And what we finally settled on was an ordinance that would be passed by the city council that would require the police department or any government agency for that matter to get specific approval before they could purchase and utilize any type of surveillance equipment. Because basically what's happening with a lot of this stuff is it's done in secret. Police departments get federal grant money. The councils don't even know they've got it. You know, the next thing you know, they're operating spy cameras or stingray devices that can lock onto cell phones or license plate readers. That's a favorite in California. So the idea was to simply, first step, require the police department to get city council approval before they could use any surveillance equipment. It would have to be done with a public meeting, so there had to be public notice. People would then get to know beforehand, you know, that the city's trying to buy whatever the surveillance gear is. So it was basically just a first step. It was something that we thought was reasonable, that it would be possible to get past. It was actionable. It was something that we could tangibly do. And it was something that we felt like was a good first step. We didn't feel like we were going to be able to get a ban on surveillance equipment given the dynamics in the city of Lexington. So that's what we proceeded to do. And then we got sued. So that really derailed the whole activism thing, because funny thing, when you get sued, nobody will talk to you anymore. But this whole process brings up a number of things from a practical standpoint that you can do as you get into your activism. So again, first thing is just figure out, what is it that we want to target? What is it that we want to do? It needs to be a specific thing. It needs to be something that you can take action on, you know, not just something that you can make a speech. Not that that's necessarily a bad thing, but you really want to be able to do something. And you have to take into account the political dynamics in your community to kind of figure out what will float. In Lexington, it's a very police-friendly community. And as a result, we had to be very careful about being really aggressive against the police. Now, I think in LA, y'all could probably get away with being much more aggressive toward the LAPD, because I think there's a large constituency that hates the police department. That wasn't going to fly in Lexington. So you kind of tailor your strategy based on the political dynamics of your area. So as you engage in this, so you've figured out what you want to do. Maybe it has to do with firearms. Maybe it has to do with COVID regulations. Maybe it has to do with surveillance. Whatever the issue is, the first thing that you want to do is you want to gather as much information as you can about the given issue that you're pursuing. This is extremely important. You need to know more than they do about what it is that you're trying to get done. Here's some specific things that you'll want to know, and I've got a list here, so I'm reading, which is kind of weird on Zoom, but I'm gonna do my best here. Specific things you need to know beyond the basics of your issue before you embark on activism. What is the current local and state law relating to your issue? For us, we kind of did some research and made sure that there weren't any regulations on the books regarding surveillance. You need to know, you'd look kind of stupid if you're proposing an ordinance and that's already on the books. So you can find this out generally looking at your city codes, your city ordinances. All of this information is publicly available. Has your local government taken any recent steps on this issue one way or the other? So we knew that the city council had approved these cameras in the park. So we knew, kind of the dynamics of the council. We knew that basically there was only one person on council that was really concerned about privacy, which did not work well in our favor. But you have to get that political lay of the land. 3, are there other organizations already involved in your issue, either for or against your position? So identifying potential allies and potential opponents. For us, there were some allies in the homeless community. There were some allies in some of the Black Lives Matters groups. I don't think they were really calling themselves that when we first did it, but those types of organizations. There was some allies in the immigration community, in the homeless community. We knew the opposition would be the police department. Pretty much anything that you do that involves activism at some point will probably get opposition from the police department, because that's what they do. No, I'm not cynical about cops. Has anybody in your local government talked about this issue recently? Again, identifying potential allies, identifying potential opponents who are in positions of decision-making, positions of power. Have there ever been any efforts to accomplish your goals in the past? Has anybody ever tried to do this before or anything similar? And again, you might have an opportunity to network with folks that have some experience in this area of your issue. Who has decision-making power in your local government? The city or county council, the mayor, city manager, bureaucratic heads like police chiefs. So you have to have a sense of your community's political dynamics. Who are the decision makers? How is the decision making laid out? Who has decision making authority? In most cases, your council has the most power. Although there are some situations where you'll have some unilateral decision making that's possible from, say, the mayor, or again, a city manager. So just knowing that, how your city government works, how your county government works, how your school board works, whatever it is that you're engaging in, knowing just how the system works. And it's very important as you get into activism to really have a grasp on this, again, so that you can push things through in a way that's efficient and you don't end up making yourself look silly. So a lot of info to gather. How do you get it? Well, believe it or not, Google is your friend. We got a ton of information on Lexington Police Department and surveillance just by Googling. Google will oftentimes lead you to official city websites. And for like Lexington, once you got to their city council website, they actually have a place where they have the minutes to all their meetings. You can download all of the documents that are presented at these meetings. It was very unwieldy and difficult to navigate, but all of that information was there. And we spent about 3 weeks just kind of digging through these archives, watching city council videos, trying to figure out where was this approved, where was this discussed. So we had a really good idea of where surveillance had been brought up as an issue over really the last 5 years. So all of that information is going to be available to you. A lot of it just by simply doing good, solid internet research. You can talk to other activists in the community, especially if there are activists that have been involved in this issue in the past. A lot of times they can give you a really good lay of the land. And of course, you'll hopefully be able to recruit them to join your efforts, because the more the merrier. And then another great tool that you can use are Freedom of Information Act requests. And I have no idea what the FOIA laws are like in California. They were very, very good in Kentucky. They're very, very good here in Florida, where I am now. I can basically get any public officials. I can get all of their emails if it's from a city or a government account. That's how much leeway you have for information here in Florida. A lot of states aren't quite that good, but there's a lot of information that you can get simply by making Freedom of Information Act requests. I make a lot of them. Sometimes I do it just to rattle cages. There's a pretty good website. If you just Google like California FOIA or Freedom of Information Act, you'll probably find a place where they'll have like a form letter that will conform to California state law that'll lay out exactly how you kind of frame your request, find out who you send it to. Most big government entities have a Freedom of Information Act person that handles public information. And I just ask for all kinds of stuff. It's amazing the information that you can dig up on FOIA requests. In fact, in my early days of journalism, I worked at the St. Petersburg Times, which is now the Tampa Bay Times. And I sat across from an investigative reporter. She actually had won a couple of Pulitzers. She exposed a whole bunch of corruption in the Jeb Bush administration when he was governor of Florida. And she basically spent her days making Freedom of Information Act requests and then reading documents. And that woman dug up so much stuff. And one of the things that I thought was interesting that she told me is, you're reading these, she said, you look for the small things, the little bitty inconsistencies, because those small things will lead you to big things. So like for us with the surveillance, I did my Freedom of Information Act request. I basically asked for information on, and I just listed all of the surveillance type of gear that I could imagine: stingrays, license plate readers, cameras, facial recognition, and asked for any documents relating to, operating manuals, just anything that you can imagine. You make these things as specific as you can, but also as broad as you can, so you can get information. Having this information will make you much more powerful as you go forward, because a lot of times government does stuff simply because nobody knows they're doing it. And when you can expose it, a lot of times you don't even have to get an ordinance passed or anything like that. You can expose malfeasance and, get that into the hands of the public and Katie bar the door. So FOIA request, huge tool that you have at your disposal. So now you've got an issue. You've got the issue that you want to cover. You've seen something, so you're going to do something. And you've done the information gathering. You know as much as you figure you possibly could know. The next thing that you need to do is determine what is your specific strategy going to be. And again, for us, it was this transparency and accountability ordinance. Well, I keep coughing. So you'll want to come up with that very specific strategy. The key thing here is it needs to be actionable. I think a lot of people get these vague notions like, we're going to stop surveillance in Los Angeles. That's too big. I mean, it's a great place to start, but it has to be a specific actionable thing. So, specific. So we're going to ban facial recognition in Los Angeles, or we're going to bypass this COVID regulation, whatever it is. It has to be a specific thing that this is what we are aiming to do. So when people ask, what are you trying to do? You can say, we are trying to do X. So when people ask me, what were you doing in Lexington? I said, we're working to get an ordinance passed that will require city council approval before the use of any surveillance equipment. Our goal is to create an environment of transparency and oversight and accountability. So that was basically what we were trying to do. And then we had a longer term goal because we were going to build on that, because ultimately we wanted to get certain surveillance equipment banned in the city, but we figured that was too much to bite off in the first chunk. So we had that long-term strategic goal, kind of in surveillance in Lexington, but our first goal was very actionable, very specific thing. So you need to figure out what that is, and then figure out what tactics that you need to do in order to get that thing done. The next thing that you're going to want to do is you're going to want to start organizing your activism. So you've got your issue, you've got your information, you've got your actionable specific goal, the thing that we're going to do. The next thing you want to do is start to put the building blocks in place so that you can push this effort forward. And this is where social media is very, very powerful. We were able to put together a pretty good, solid, close-knit group of people that were interested in this issue very quickly using a Facebook group, just a private Facebook group. We knew a few folks that we knew would be interested. We invited them to the group. They invited a few people to the group. And eventually we had about 30 people who were kind of our inner circle where we could bounce things off of. We used that private group just to bounce ideas off of each other, private communication. It was really, really great way to just kind of, pull people together without having to have a meeting or anything like that. We just drop something in that group, get feedback on it, and then move forward on it. It was also great for, hey, we need somebody to run the Twitter account. Oh, okay, I'll do that. So you get those folks that are really interested, you put them in that private group. You kind of keep that limited. You make sure that they're people that are trustworthy, that are really down with what you're doing, and who are going to help. And then we had our public Facebook page that we created as a way that was kind of the outward facing to the community. And again, some of the functionality of Facebook was really helpful in that you can target, very specific people. So we would post some articles and then target those using ads to people that were just in Lexington that had expressed interest in privacy or interest in surveillance or interest in police accountability, and you could target those folks. And we pretty quickly grew that Facebook page to about 800 or 900 people, which, Lexington's not a big city. So it was a pretty good core group that we were able to grow fairly quickly. And again, you can use that group to keep people informed and kind of be that outward facing publicity kind of thing. We also had a website. I did I paid $30 and did a little WordPress site, bought the domain WeSeeYouWatchingLexington.com, and then posted pretty regularly in there. Would do articles, would feature things on the council, would post videos, just all of these kind of things that we do on social media that was relating to our activism. So it was we were able to build a pretty high profile pretty quickly utilizing the power of social media. Of course, video is a fantastic tool, using the YouTubes, using the Facebook video algorithms. people seem to really respond, I would just do these, like, 3 or 4 minute Facebook lives. Hey, this is what's going on. This is what the council's doing. This is what's going on with the lawsuit, whatever it is. We get a lot of views on those things. And again, it was just a quick way to get out information. Another thing that you're going to want to do is you're going to want to figure out how to garner some media attention. And this is something I'm really good at, because I'm a journalist by training. I worked in the world of media. And so what I did was I actually put together an email media list of all of the outlets in Lexington. Of course, Lexington was easy because it's not that big. And, I would do press releases, and I would just use the good old MailChimp account. And anytime anything happened, I would pop out a press release to our 30 or 40 press contacts. And over the couple of years we were really pushing, I was on TV numerous times. I got a bunch of radio appearances. People were interested in it, especially when I got sued. Getting sued is great for activism. It's not so great for actually getting anything done with the government, but it's great for getting publicity. And so, it's pretty easy to, if it's a controversial thing, if it's a thing that the community is interested in, you will have success getting media attention if you just kind of present yourself as a professional organization and just kind of hammer out these press releases, every so often. Now, you don't want to do like every third day or anything. I mean, there needs to be something relevant that you're telling them, but you can definitely, I think we underestimate, as we're so used to being ignored as libertarians when it comes to electoral politics that we feel like the media will never pay attention to us. But when it's an issue-based thing like surveillance or education or whatever it is, the media will be interested, especially if you're starting to make waves with the council and starting to build a coalition. And that brings me to the next very important thing to do: coalition building. This is something that we have been very successful with at the 10th Amendment Center. We call them single issue coalitions. And we will basically work with anybody on a given issue. So when it comes to like surveillance, we work with a lot of folks on the hard left because they care about surveillance. And we may disagree with 90% of what they're doing. But if we are in agreement on this specific issue, if they were down with our ordinance and with our efforts to limit surveillance in Lexington, we were more than happy to work with them. And the bigger coalition you can build, the better off you're going to be. And there are some folks out there in California that are fantastic in the surveillance realm with this kind of coalition building. I've worked real closely with the group up in Northern California, kind of headed up by the Northern California ACLU, but they've got a huge coalition of probably 15 or 20 organizations. And that's in large part why we've seen facial recognition bans in San Francisco, Oakland, Berkeley, why we've seen these ordinance limiting surveillance equipment in these areas, because these guys are really good at coalition building, and they can magnify their voice by working with a broad range of folks. So don't ever underestimate that power. And I think a lot of people, some people aren't going to work with you because, oh my gosh, we can't work with libertarians because, we're evil or something. But I think a lot of people are more than happy if you build those bridges, and if you show them that you're interested in the same things that they're interested in, they're more than happy to work with you. I mean, they may disagree with you on guns, but they'll work with you on surveillance. Or folks on the right, they'll work with you on guns, but maybe not on surveillance, or maybe they will. But I really love coalition building. And again, it's something, just reach out to people. We just sat one day, Clay and I, we just brainstormed who would care about surveillance in Lexington. And we just started reaching out to these groups. And, we got some responses and we got blown off by some folks. But coalition building is powerful. And the more voices you have, the more diverse those voices, the more politically diverse those voices are, the more pressure it puts on politicians and decision makers to kind of do the right thing. So media presence, social media presence, and coalition building are some great foundational tools that will help you push your activism forward. Talked about media a little bit already. One of the things I think is really important is to control the messaging. And I highly recommend, if you're going to get into local activism, take the time to read Rules for Radicals by Saul Alinsky. I know a lot of people on the right are like, oh, he's evil. I've read that book 3 times. Some of the stuff in there, and just in terms of strategy, in terms of what they call community organizing, are fantastic. I don't agree with all of it, and quite frankly, some of it I have a little bit of an ethical problem with. But there's a lot of really good tactical strategies that you'll get out of that book, out of Rules for Radicals. And if you can control the narrative, if you can control the discussion, you will go very far in your activism. And one of the things I specifically remember is that one of the chapters in there talks about personifying the enemy. You know, people don't care as much about an issue. You know, surveillance camera is this inanimate thing that doesn't really bother them. But if you can pin it on a person, then you can really get people, you know, kind of at an emotional level. So we found out that the guy that that had spearheaded these cameras in the park was a council member named Fred Brown. And we kind of reached out to him backdoor and pretty quickly realized that this guy was going to be absolutely useless to us and was going to be an opponent every step of the way. We figured that it was worth it to just kind of use him as our scapegoat. So we started calling him Spy Pole Fred. We actually hashtagged him, hashtag Spy Pole Fred. And that kind of caught on. You know, people thought it was funny. They remembered it. It's a person. He wasn't a very likable character to begin with. So, as a lot of politicians aren't. So you can kind of use these things to kind of grab the narrative. And of course, it's very important to know what your opponents are going to come back with. So with surveillance, you know, the first thing that you're going to hear is, well, if you got nothing to hide, you got nothing to fear. So I figured out before we even started, how am I going to address this issue? And had a lot of fun with this guy on a radio show one day that was trying that garbage with me. So, you know, just think very carefully about controlling the language, controlling the narrative. I talked a little bit about building a media list, doing press releases. If you guys get into some activism and want some help with media, hit me up. I'll be glad to do it. I love doing press releases. I love doing media stuff. That's kind of my wheelhouse, and would be happy to help you guys out with something like that. So keep that in mind, because that's again something that I'd be more than happy to do. Doing interviews, something that you might find yourself involved in. Michael Bolden is one of the best interviewees in the world. And he taught me kind of how to do it. And basically what you want to do, if you're going to be talking to anybody, somebody on radio, somebody on television, you want to have basically 3 points in your head that you want to make. And then no matter what they ask you, you figure out how to make those points. Bolden calls it block and pivot. And there is an art to it. You know, we see a lot of politicians try to do it, and it's like, dude, you're not answering the question. So the secret of block and pivot is to kind of answer the question, but then pivot to what you really want to say. And again, if you get in a position where you have the opportunity to do media and want some coaching in that area, I would be happy to help out with that as well. Again, that's my wheelhouse. We were really good at messaging. As it turns out, not so good at the actual dealing with politicians. That was our weak spot. So just a couple other things to think about. You want to build on opportunities as they arise. Activism is a weird thing, and you'll go for weeks and weeks and think nothing's happening. And then this thing will happen, and it'll be this golden opportunity, and you'll have like a week or two where it's like, that's all you're doing. And you just have to be ready for that. You know, it could be somebody makes a statement or something pops up in the news that relates to your issue that you can seize on, or, there's a council meeting or you get sued. You just have to seize on these opportunities and be ready to pounce when they come up and not get discouraged in the 2, 3, 4, 5 weeks where it seems like nothing's going on. It's a little bit of a battle of patience. And kind of a final thing, just don't be afraid to make a mistake. Learn from the mistakes and go forward. You're going to have things that just aren't going to go well. When we first started, we thought we're going to have a rally. And it was really too early to have a rally. And we had like 5 people at our rally, which was, of those 5, well, there was 7 people there. There were 5 of us and 2 cops. So not the most exciting rally, but we did video it. So we kind of salvaged something out of it because we had a good video of the speech. But, again, you just kind of back up and punt and learn from those mistakes, and you can't beat yourself up because some of this stuff is hard. I mean, you're dealing with powerful people. You're dealing with a lot of times conniving people and people that have the ability and power to hide things. And so, you're at a disadvantage from the beginning, but you can kind of seize on that and learn and push forward. So I think those are kind of the basic nuts and bolts. Once you have that structure in place, you have your coalition, you have your folks that are working with you and your volunteers, then it's just a matter of figuring out what to do to push your thing through to the end. So, for us, it would be getting this ordinance actually introduced, finding a council member who's willing to introduce it, and then rallying the votes and getting the thing passed. Now, our story does not end well because, again, we got sued. So that really, it was a boon for publicity. It was very bad for activism because it honestly gave them an excuse to basically say every time we tried to contact anybody in council, they would literally say, "We can't talk to you. We're involved in ongoing legal issue." I couldn't even talk to my own city council member. He wouldn't talk to me. He wouldn't talk to me about things that weren't related to the case because it was just a good excuse. And so then I moved. So that kind of put a damper on things. So my buddy Clay is still working up there, and they just had a council election. So that's changed the dynamics of the council a little bit. So we might have some success in getting something introduced here in the next year or so. But I think that's kind of the stuff that I wanted to cover. We'll kind of do the summary. Find your issue. Learn about your issue. Come up with an actionable plan that addresses your issue, something that is tangible that you can do. Build your coalition. Build your media and your social media so that you can communicate to the community and build support, and then push through to the completion of your first goal, and then kind of repeat the process. Once you get that one thing done, then have something in mind. Okay, so we're going to build on that. We're going to do the next thing. And then, eventually there'll be no surveillance in California and we'll all be free. So I think that covers. I would be more than happy to address any questions or discuss further of things that I might have forgotten because, it's like 11:30.
I totally understand. I really appreciate it. That was a fantastic talk, Mike. And I do have a quick question about something you said very early on, actually, and it was with regard to strategy for just kind of not trying to go for too much, like right. Be realistic or, kind of take baby steps. Well, the thing is that while I can get that strategy and I understand it, it seems to me that like anybody else in the political spectrum, especially the progressives right now, and I'm sure the conservatives do it too to some degree or have this ability, it's just that it's more recent with progressive movement and their ideology and everything that they're pushing for. They do not take that stance. They want everything and they want it now, and they demand it. And when they get a little bit, they make sure that everybody knows how disappointed they are and that they're coming back for more. And it seems to me that if they can do it, why couldn't we do it? Is there a qualitative difference between us as libertarians and them as the progressives, or the conservatives in their ways of handling things of this nature? Why are they able to do this very publicly, very vocally, very loudly, and somehow we have to take a more muted stance in our approach?
That's a good question, and I don't think that maybe I should have been more clear in how I explain that, because I don't think you necessarily have to. It really depends on the dynamics of your community and what you're trying to do. I disagree a little bit. I think if you look at the way progressives have accomplished things, you're right in the fact that they are very, very vocal about everything that they want. You know, they shoot for the moon. But if you actually look at the way they push things through at a legislative level, it tends to be much smaller and incremental. In other words, they will publicly say, we want a $40 an hour minimum wage. I'm just pulled that out of the air, but whatever. But when it comes to actually legislating, they'll take a $10 minimum wage over 5 years, knowing that they can push that envelope further. So I think you're right. A lot of times the rhetoric is much louder and at a much higher level. I think what they're actually doing at the legislative level is more incremental. And I certainly think that you could take that approach. Again, it depends on what you're doing and what the public perception is going to be. And so I'm a little bit biased because my experience was in a very conservative community that by and large did not favor what we were talking about. We were fighting an extremely uphill battle. We had a community that by and large loved the cops and didn't think being spied on was a problem. So for us to come out full bore and say, we want to get rid of surveillance because surveillance is awful, which was our goal, that was not going to play in Lexington, Kentucky. I think you could take a much more aggressive stance if you were doing, say, surveillance in Los Angeles, because I think there is a much more, I feel like there's a lot more animosity towards the police. I think there is a much bigger population that is wary of surveillance for various reasons. So you could be more aggressive on that. Now, let's say that you decided your activism that you wanted to do in LA was guns. Probably not going to go over real well if you start off, you know, we're going to legalize all firearms in Los Angeles, you know. So you would probably take the more muted approach in that sense. So it's really a matter of feeling out your community, the political environment, and what can you get away with? I mean, I'm all for pushing to the highest level that you can push. But I'm also willing to take those incremental steps. And so when I'm talking about the incrementalism, I'm talking really more at the specific legislative level, and not opposing a small step forward just because it's not a big enough step forward, if that makes sense. Again, with the marijuana, we have often supported in certain states relatively weak medical marijuana programs with a lot of restrictions, where a lot of libertarians are going, oh, this is horrible because the taxes are too high. I'm like, no. We just have to get our foot in the door here. I promise you that in the end, it will open up. West Virginia, perfect example of this. Their medical program was horrible. Virginia, medical program was horrible. And then all of a sudden, it just kind of evolved and morphed. And then the next thing you know, they have a legitimate medical marijuana program there. So yeah, there's really no, so I guess all of that to say, there's really no one size fits all. This is the strategy that you have to take. It really depends on where you are, what is your issue, in what is the political environment and what kind of public reaction are you going to get to what you're doing. And I would certainly say, push it to the highest level that you possibly can. And, you know, if you feel like you're getting too much pushback, be willing to back off of that. And if you feel like you can push farther, push farther. It's kind of a, you know, it's kind of an intuitive gut thing that you kind of got to play with. So yeah, good question.
Thank you. Now, anybody else have any questions?
Might I ask, I'm just out of curiosity, why you were sued and I mean, who sued you and what that was about?
Yeah, this is a fun story. So all of this has to do with the way the open records laws are written in Kentucky. So I did an open records request. The city of Lexington acknowledged that they had these super secret cameras and said that they were not going to release any information on these cameras based on specific exceptions in the open records law, which I didn't think applied. In Kentucky, the way it works is if you are denied an open records request, the first step is you go to the Attorney General. So they actually have a department in the Attorney General's office that handles what they call open records appeals. So I wrote up my appeal, sent it to the Attorney General's office, and the Attorney General found in my favor and basically told the police department, the exceptions you're trying to use don't apply. You need to release these records. This is where things get quirky. In the state of Kentucky, if you dispute the Attorney General's opinion, the only way you can do that is to take it to court. So that means there has to be a lawsuit. But you can't sue the Attorney General. You have to sue the other party. So when the police department was told that they had to give up the documents, they decided they weren't going to do it. So then they sue me. It's interesting because, I mean, it's a stupid system, granted. Mm-hmm. And then the police department was kind of abusing it because it was obviously an attempt to intimidate me and make me go away. They knew I was a single individual. I think if I had been like a newspaper or an actual media outlet, they probably would have just given up the documents. But I think they thought they could make me go away. And the reason that I suspect this is in the lawsuit, they actually asked the judge to grant them to make me pay their legal fees, which, as it turns out, isn't even legal in an open records case. Like, they can't make me do that. They just put that in there just for the hell of it, you know, just so that I would look at it and go, oh my God, I'm going to have to pay this, which is stupid. I mean, I joke all the time that, you know, you hear this kind of trope that we are the government. I'm like, well, why the hell am I suing myself and paying and charging myself to do it, you know? So yeah, that was the long and short of it. It was an open records case. And I actually, so the progress of the case, I won at the circuit court level. The city went back to the circuit court and said, no, you didn't understand what we were saying. So we went to the circuit court again. They lost again at the circuit court. So then they appealed to the state court of appeals. The state court of appeals decided that it was really laughable because the city kept changing their strategy as they went. Like, I'm not a lawyer. I honest to God think I could have made their case better based on the open records law than they did. They finally got it right by the time they got to the Court of Appeals, and the stupid judges kept letting them kind of shift the goalposts as they went along. But at the appeals level, they basically said, well, the long and short of it was they were claiming that if I knew about these cameras, they would never be able to use them again, because the criminal element in Lexington is so smart that they would be able to thwart these super secret hidden cameras if we knew anything about them. That was their argument. So they called it an undue burden on the city because they would have to buy all new cameras. And so at the appeals level, the appeals court basically said, okay, you need to go back to the circuit court level, and the city gets to go into a super secret conference and show the judge why these cameras are so important and why it would put officers at risk and put an undue burden on the department if we knew what they were. So that's what the appeals court said. We went back to the circuit court, and once we did the super secret meeting, they happened to finally get a judge that was very pro-police, and she ruled in their favor. And we could have appealed again, but again, by that point, I'd moved to Florida. It had been 3 years, and we actually kind of carved out a little bit of good space at the appellate level based on some of the wording that they said. I don't get into all that legal mumbo jumbo, but so we felt like at that point it was going to be a crapshoot going back to the appellate level. And since I already knew what the cameras were, we thought it would be more beneficial to allow the lawsuit to just stand as it was. And then I went ahead and released the information that I knew about the cameras. And to my knowledge, I don't think they've sold their super secret cameras yet, now that I've revealed their nature. But it was quite an experience. It was a 3-year thing. And thank goodness the ACLU represented me, because there's no way in the world that I would have been able to do it by myself. I didn't have the resources, which quite frankly, that's what the police department thought would happen. They thought I would just drop it and go away. And to their great surprise, they ended up getting, it was not a good look for the city. And I think it garnered significant sympathy for our position as things went on. Good times. So my next little project is I'm going to start doing open records requests here in the community where I live. I've discovered that the Nassau County Sheriff Department, and basically I live on the Florida-Georgia border. Nassau County is pretty rural. And for some reason, our Sheriff's Department and the Fernandina Beach Police Department, which is Fernandina Beach, is about 20,000 people. They both have automatic license plate readers on their patrol cars. I'm really curious of how they managed to fund that and what they're using those for. So that's my next little project.
That's great. Anybody else have any questions?
I just have a quick question. So I think I've actually gotten the answer from Bolden before, but basically nullification is the relationship basically between the state and the federal government.
Correct.
I think what we're seeing a lot of nowadays is even counties within the state are now basically, it's like, especially in California, you know, with all these counties now basically coming out and saying, we're not going to honor the governor's orders and mandates.
Right.
And so it's a big wave of basically rebellion that's going now through the state. Is the relationship between the state governments and counties, like from the city to the county, like with the city of Pasadena is basically not going to honor the county, LA County mandate, you know, and things like that happening? What is the relationship difference?
That's a great question. Okay, so let's parse out the legal difference first, because I think that's significant. The legal relationship between the state and the federal government is basically the state is effectively sovereign, and the federal government only has authority in the areas that it has authority. Okay, so you basically have a situation of dual sovereignty. And the Supreme Court has held multiple times that the federal government cannot force a state to utilize personnel or resources for a federal action. So in other words, the federal government cannot force California to use money, state money or state personnel to enforce a federal law or to implement a federal program. So this is why the whole sanctuary city thing works, because the federal government can't force the state of California to actually engage in immigration enforcement. Now, y'all can't physically block, you can't arrest ICE agents or anything like that, but they can't make you use, LAPD to go round up immigrants. So there's a separation there. There's not a damn thing the federal government can do if a state or local government doesn't want to enforce a federal law. So again, with marijuana, the federal government can't make California enforce federal marijuana laws. They just can't do it. That's called the anti-commandeering doctrine. The relationship between a county and a city and the state is completely different. The they're basically just political subdivisions. They have no autonomy and no sovereignty in and of themselves. So basically, a county and a city exist at the will of the state. The state has virtually complete control over a city and a county. There are some exceptions to that. So like Illinois has a really strong, what they call home rule law. And California may have some of this. I don't know, to be honest, where the county has actually some autonomy built in. It's in the state constitution in Illinois. And the legislature actually has to have a supermajority in order to override home rule. So there is a little bit of power in that situation to the county. But by and large, if a county or a city refuses to follow a state mandate, the state has recourse. The state could cut funding. The state could remove people from office. The state could punish the community. Conceivably, and I know for a fact in Kentucky, the state can actually just dissolve a county by legislative fiat. So that's the main difference. The federal government can't punish California for not enforcing a federal law, whereas the state of California could punish the city of Pasadena in some way, whether it be funding or removing people from office or whatever. That said, if you have enough local rebellion, it becomes difficult from a practical standpoint for the state to do anything. So I would not discourage local activism against the state. I would just go at it knowing that the state does have legal recourse. You don't have legal cover like you would if you're facing the feds. The law protects the state and the local government from federal punishment. There is no legal cover for a city or a county when it faces the state. But again, if you have large numbers, then it just becomes a number game. I use the example all the time of speeding on the highway. The cops might be able to pick off one or two speeders, but they cannot make all of the traffic go 55 miles an hour. They just can't do it. There's too many people that are disregarding it. So I don't necessarily discourage using kind of a nullification strategy, a non-cooperation strategy at the local and county level. I just say do so with the knowledge that you could have repercussions that come down from the state.
Yeah, that's kind of what was happening. Like in Riverside County, where I live, like Jeff Hewitt was proposing a bill to basically say, okay, we got it from here and back off and basically do their own thing. But again, the fear that came down from the other council or the other people on the board was funding, a withdrawal of funds.
Right.
And that's basically why others on the board voted against it, was because they were afraid of the withdrawal of funds.
Right. And I think that would probably be a legitimate concern.
But there's a big coalition between, let's say Jeff now is partnering. There's a whole bunch of elected officials across other counties, across other cities, and everywhere that are like the Open Cal Now movement.
Right.
And I mean, that's basically a massive movement, and they're doing other things with going together and basically doing more of a grassroots effort of, protesting, making social media appearances, making, social media and media appearances and everything else in between.
Yeah. There's also the public perception game. There is a point, and this is the rebel in me, that will say at some point, all right, take the funding and then explain to this county, the people of this county who support what we're doing, why you're taking their funding. I remember back when they first did the TSA naked body scanners. I think it was like 2013, 2014, and everybody was in an uproar about TSA. And then they, if you didn't want to go through the naked body scanner, then you got to be sexually assaulted by the TSA agent. And Texas actually, the House of Representatives actually introduced a bill that would have basically made it so that if the TSA agents touched you in the way that they were touching you, that they could be charged with sexual assault. And it actually passed the Texas House. It was going to pass the Texas Senate. The feds got wind of it, and they came roaring in and basically said, if you do this, we're going to shut down your airports. My reaction to that was, let them. because I think they would have a hard time explaining to the general public, yeah, we've shut down air traffic in the United States because we think we should be able to grope you. You know, there's just certain things that don't play well. So if you can spin things the right way, if you have enough public support rebelling against these lockdowns in particular areas, I think now getting politicians with the will to actually stand up, that's a whole different ball of wax. But that is an option of being willing to take the consequences and then turning that against the state, because it just doesn't look good for them to be saying, you know, we're going to take your life away and your funding. So again, you kind of have to figure where is that line of strategy that's going to work. But I wouldn't take anything off the table.
All right. Anybody else? I guess that's it. Well, again, Mike, thank you very much. It was very informative. I think we'll probably be reaching out to you. Absolutely. I know you have a lot of great ideas. You have a lot of boilerplate legislation and things as well, that I understand.
Yeah, we have a lot of stuff that that is primarily directed at the state level. We do have some. I have a lot of resources in terms of surveillance stuff, just because that's what I've been doing, and we've got some good local ordinance language that can be used. Also, for police militarization, we've got some good legislation for that will work at the local level. We've got a pretty good gun sanctuary ordinance, which is much better than what they're trying to do up in Oregon, which runs into this problem we were just talking about with the trying to nullify the state. But yeah, we do have those resources. People can go to 10thamendmentcenter.com, and you'll see all kinds of stuff over there. And if people want to reach me, it's just my name, Michael.Maharrey at 10thamendmentcenter.com. 10th Amendment Center is all spelled out. And you can feel free to email me and get back to me, or I'm on the Facebook, so you can message me there. And I'll be glad to help out in any way I can. You know, like I said, especially my wheelhouse is messaging and media, and would be more than happy to help folks out with that kind of thing. So,
all right, Mike. Well, again, thank you very much for your time. I know it's late, so we're gonna let you go, but have a great night, and we'll be in contact.
Yeah, I appreciate it. Thank you, guys. I appreciate all that you guys are doing out there. I always hear great things about the LP down there in LA and in California in general. And of course, I've met a lot of you guys, so appreciate everything that you're doing, and just keep up the fight, man.
Awesome. Thank you very much. Take care.